Hey guys, now in case you can't already tell by this DVD cover here, today I'm here to give you my DVD review of Ladies and Gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman. And I got this at Best Buy for about $20 or so, and I gotta say it is well worth the money. So if you have the money, I recommend you buy this DVD at your stores, whatever stores you have. I recommend you buy it. So here's the front cover of the DVD, and then here is the side with Paul Heyman on the mic. And then I'm just gonna hold this right here for about 10 seconds for you guys to read. Alright, and then, and I really like the inside cover of this. On this you have the voice of the voiceless, Paul Heyman as CM Punk's manager during CM Punk's 434-day title run. And then on this side you have the one behind the one and 21-1 with Paul Heyman with Brock Lesnar after Brock Lesnar beat The Undertaker's undefeated streak at WrestleMania. So I really like this cover here. I like that they have CM Punk, and I like that they have Brock Lesnar right there. And then here's what the inside looks like. I'll go to this side here first. It's kind of hard to read because of the light here. But disc 1 is like the documentary, which is about, I don't know, an hour or so long. Depends on how fast you go through it. And then the second disc, like I said, it's hard to read, but these are all promos by Paul Heyman from the AWA, WCW, ECW. And this is stories he told of Mr. McMahon Sr., Andre the Giant, a car ride, the trouble in Memphis, and etc., etc. And then he has these teasers. It's hard to read. I apologize for that. Nothing I can really do about that. And then again for disc 3, it's all promos. And this was when he was in WWE for Raw and SmackDown. And then at the end here, there's matches where it was the Midnight Express, the original Midnight Express versus the new Midnight Express, the Hardy Boys versus Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman, and the no disqualification handicap elimination match between CM Punk versus Curtis Axel and Paul Heyman. So all in all, good content here. I'll get into that in a second. And then here is disc 1 with Paul Heyman, and then here is disc 2, and then disc 3. And here, I'll open these up for you guys. So behind disc 1, you have him with a rap thing, or I can't remember what those things are called. They're film outtakes or something like that, but he has one of those. And behind disc 2, you've got Paul Heyman with a mic again. And then this one is hella creepy. I mean, Paul Heyman's a pretty creepy dude, I'll tell you. Then here's disc 3. I don't know about you guys, but Paul Heyman's a pretty creepy dude. But, all in all, guys, I really have no complaints for this DVD. I really liked this DVD, and I really liked the documentary Paul Heyman had. Is this DVD as great as Stone Cold Steve Austin's or CM Punk's? Not really, because there's not as many matches, but there's a lot of promos, so that's kind of new. But, all in all, guys, I thought this was a very good DVD. The documentary was very interesting. I won't spoil too much for you guys, but it was just interesting hearing about Paul Heyman and how he grew up, because I guess his mom was like a Holocaust survivor, and his dad, I think his dad fought in World War II, and he was in the Navy, and then he came out to be a lawyer or something like that. And then Paul Heyman talked about how he pretty much went into the WWE at Madison Square Garden at the age of, I think it was 14 or 17, and not a lot of people really liked him. He was a photographer, and he would always get in the way of other people's shots to get a picture of a wrestler. And then later on, he snuck backstage as the photographer, and he went into one of Dusty Rhodes' meetings, and he was writing stuff down, and Dusty Rhodes finally noticed him and asked him what the hell he was doing there, and then Paul Heyman said that he wanted to learn from him, and that he wanted to, be on the creative team and all this stuff, and I just thought that was all really interesting. And then throughout the DVD, you learn about how Paul Heyman gets to all these wrestling promotions, like they say, like on how he got into the AWA, WCW, ECW, and besides that, what else, guys? There's, you learn about how he had managed, he managed just a bunch of superstars, a bunch of wrestlers, and there's just all those stories, like he had managed Stone Cold Steve Austin after Eric Bischoff had fired him from, I think it was WCW, I'm not 100% sure about that, but, and then he also talks about how, he, pretty much saved CM Punk's career, because the WWE was not going to keep him, and so then Paul Heyman pretty much saved him and brought him to ECW and all this stuff, and it was just all really interesting. And then Paul Heyman also talks about how he, besides being a photographer, he was a manager, and then he was on the creative team for ECW and SmackDown, and it was really interesting about how he had taken over ECW, because it used to be called, I think it was Eastern Championship Wrestling, and then he changed it to Extreme Championship Wrestling as we know today. And he talks about ECW, and he talks about how they at one point were broke, and when they were broke, I think Mr. McMahon wired $500,000 to them so that they could keep their business going, which I thought was pretty surprising that Mr. McMahon would do that. And then he also talks about how since they were going broke in ECW, some of the wrestlers, I think it was Tommy Dreamer, would sometimes go a month without getting paid, because that is on how badly in debt they were. I think they were once $60,000 in debt or something like that. Just crazy to listen to, and just really interesting about ECW, really interesting. And it was also interesting about how Paul Heyman worked on the creative team with Stephanie McMahon for SmackDown, and that he had wanted to make SmackDown better than Raw, but that he had kind of creative differences with Mr. McMahon and Stephanie McMahon. So that was all really interesting about how sometimes he would get along with Mr. McMahon, and then other times they would just have complete blowouts, and they would fight and have really different creative differences. So I thought that was really interesting, and yeah, so just really interesting stuff. And then he talked about how ECW kind of sucked after ECW One Night Stand 2006, when that was pretty much the last hurrah of ECW. And he talks about how the 2006 version sucked, and they said that if they named it anything else other than ECW, then that could have been a decent wrestling show. But since it was ECW, the new version, the WWE version, it just sucked. And then he talked about walking out of WWE in 2006 or quitting. And that he also has 2 kids. And he pretty much did other stuff while he was gone from WWE from 2006. He had his own, I think, internet show called Heyman Hustle or something like that. And yeah, and then he also talked about how he made his return to WWE in 2012 to manage Brock Lesnar, and at first he didn't really want to come back to the company. They said that ever since he came back in 2012, he has had a blast. He's had no problems really with Mr. McMahon or anything like that. They pretty much brought him in, and they said, water's under the bridge, everything's fine, let's just start fresh. And that's pretty much what happened. He talked about how he had managed. I wish they would have talked a little bit more about CM Punk and him managing CM Punk and all that, but they didn't really do that too much. But they talked about how he pretty much came back in 2012, managed Brock Lesnar, and he got to work with CM Punk, and yeah, and sorry for all the and-ums, guys, but then yeah, I mean, he pretty much, and then they showed him backstage talking with all the other wrestlers and how he gives younger talent pointers, like he oh yeah, he also worked for he also helps the NXT people down at NXT, because Paul Heyman likes to work with younger wrestlers. And yeah, I mean, just a really interesting documentary. I really enjoyed it. Just great documentary, and they had lots of people talk for Paul Heyman. Some of them didn't really like Paul Heyman. Some of them did like Paul Heyman. Like the ones who did like Paul Heyman, obviously, were Tommy Dreamer. They had Mick Foley. They had CM Punk. They had Brock Lesnar. They had Stephanie McMahon, who was not a Paul Heyman girl, but she was a Paul Heyman fan, she said. And I mean, they just had plenty of other people talk for Paul Heyman, so I thought that was pretty cool. And it was also interesting because I guess Jerry Lawler says that Paul Heyman has the talent, but he doesn't really like Paul Heyman really that much, because Paul Heyman kind of likes to manipulate people, and he likes to, like I said, he likes to manipulate and he likes to hustle people. But I mean, he said himself that he pretty much had to lie to survive in this company, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, he had to lie for ECW and all that. But it was funny, though, because in one of the stories here, he, yeah, the Trouble in Memphis, like, they had to do this thing where, and I guess, like, Paul Heyman is, like, really afraid of heights, and so, like, they had to get him to do this segment with Jerry Lawler where they were, like, on top of the scaffold thing, and Paul Heyman did not want to be up there. And then later on, like, during the match or whatever, Jerry Lawler punched Paul Heyman so hard in the face that, like, Paul Heyman got, like, a broken jaw. So that was pretty interesting, and he was giving Jerry Lawler a hard time for that and all that. Oh, and then they also talked about how Paul Heyman also worked on commentary for, and he worked on commentary with Jim Ross, and Jim Ross kind of likes Paul Heyman, although he also thinks that he's kind of a manipulative asshole sometimes, but I think him and Paul Heyman are okay now. And also, Paul Heyman was on commentary with Mr. McMahon, which also is kind of surprising, but he pretty much was on commentary for SmackDown and for Raw, or I think mostly for Raw, but either way, pretty much Paul Heyman did about everything. He was a manager, he was a commentator, he was like a creative writer. He was on the creative team for ECW and all that. And yeah, and all in all, guys, I just gotta say I really enjoyed this documentary. Great documentary. Like I said, if you have the money, I recommend you buy this DVD. It's well worth the money. And one fan, though, I will say is that for all these promos here for disc 2 and 3, I would try and not watch all the promos at once because you'll get like a headache. I didn't watch all the promos. I mostly watched the WCW, ECW, and the stories for disc 2, and then I watched a couple of the promos for disc 3. But yeah, I mean, you can watch the promos if you want. I just would recommend you don't watch them all at once. But either way, guys, I really enjoyed this DVD, and I recommend you get it. And for those of you who have seen this DVD, what did you guys think of it? And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys soon.